I pretty firmly believe that there is not a single team in the NBA this season that has been able to solidify themselves as a legitimate contender and maintain more consistency than the Boston Celtics, which honestly really shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. They're coming off of a finals appearance last season, and they're largely the same team as last year, actually better considering some of the upgrades they made during the offseason. Getting Malcolm Brogdon was one of the biggest pickups for any team, really rounding this team out and providing that secondary floor general to take charge when Marcus Smart is off the floor or when they need an extra scoring punch with the second unit. It certainly helps that they have two very clear all-NBA caliber players in Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Both Tatum and Brown are having the best seasons of their careers, with Tatum crafting an MVP campaign with 31.2 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 4.3 assists per game on a career-best 61% true shooting, and Jaylen Brown putting up 26.9 points, 7.1 rebounds, and 3.2 assists per game, also on a career-high 59% true shooting. Obviously, when you have two players like that, your team is probably going to be pretty good, especially when you surround them with as good of a supporting cast as Boston has. Now, while this team is still very much a defensive juggernaut, I want to spend the majority of this video examining some of the nuances and intricacies that makes their offense good for the number 2 offense in the NBA with a 117.5 offensive rating. That raw offensive rating is impressive enough on its own, but we can really get an even better idea of how great their offense is compared to the rest of the NBA. When you look at their half-court offensive rating, it comes out to 104.6 points per 100 possessions, which at first glance may not really seem like anything to write home about. But then you take a step back and look at the fact that there are only 8 teams in the NBA scoring more than 100 points per 100 possessions in the half-court. Considering they're well above the 97.4 league average half-court offensive rating, it's clear that they're doing something right. They're a team that relies pretty heavily on an insane amount of off-ball screening. It's actually wild sometimes to watch some of their possessions and try to keep up with how many off-ball screens are being set at any given time. But it's not necessarily the screens themselves that help generate the shots, it's sometimes just the threat of a screen. The Celtics employ the use of tons of ghost screens / slip screens. Ghosting or slipping a screen is where a player will move to a position in which the defense thinks they're going to set a screen, but before they actually set it, they instead sprint away to open space. Here's an example. Horford, after this initial screen fake with Tatum, comes up as if he's going to set the screen on 𝙖𝙗𝙤𝙪 for Brown to drive. Meanwhile, Tatum relocates to the opposite wing from where he started, which pulls his defender with him, leaving Horford wide open to get the pass inside, which forces the defensive attention from LaVine, leaving Grant Williams wide open for Horford to feed him for 3. The slip screens are so effective because if you're making the defense think that you're setting a screen, then they're going to defend as though you're setting a screen. If you have this understanding, then you can get into open space while the defense is being fooled, and the Celtics understand this very, very well. Let's look at some examples from their recent game against the Pelicans. Early in the first, Tatum would move to the corner where it would look as though he's setting a pin down screen for Jaylen Brown. Instead, he ghosts the screen, rolling to the basket, allowing Williams to get the ball to him, which leads to an open 3 for Horford in the corner. Now, on this possession, they're going to do a similar thing, instead with Horford acting as the screener for Tatum to come off the pin down. But Tatum moves into Dyson Daniels and rejects Horford's screen, operating as a pseudo-screener for Horford to get it on the wing for the 3. Later in the first quarter, they do the exact same thing again, with Horford popping out to the perimeter for another open shot. It doesn't always have to lead to a perimeter shot either, as we saw in last night's game against Golden State. Letting the screener roll to the basket can lead to entry passes for quick finishes off of the lob. These actions might look simple at first glance, but the reality is that they do an incredible job of confusing and manipulating the defense. Not only do they have to be concerned about defending the actions you're making it look like you're executing, but they also have to be able to react to the possibility that you might be faking the action, which adds an entirely different layer of complication to things. When you combine these off-ball actions with simultaneous on-ball actions, the task at hand for the defense becomes even more challenging. Let's look at this opening play from Boston's game against the Hornets. Tatum gives it to Smart, and they do a good job of selling as though Tatum is going to take it baseline to get downhill, but instead, Smart is going to curl around a Rob Williams screen with the defense staying with Tatum and Rob, allowing Smart a completely wide open lane to the basket for Tatum to find him for the lob for the slam. Here, the ball isn't even across half court by the time the Celtics already start executing the offense. Smart fakes a screen for Tatum, leading to Smart getting the ball up top off of Rob's screen. Smart gives it to Rob before receiving the screen from White, but it's actually designed to get Horford the ball on the wing in the corner. Rob dives to the basket with Horford executing the DHO with White, and when Horford rolls, it's going to pull the defense away from the perimeter, leaving Derek White wide open to pull the three. This play is super interesting because initially Kornet screens for Pritchard to come set a pin down for Tatum. Watch Devontae Graham plan for what he thinks is going to be a pin down screen from Kornet for Tatum to come off of it and get the ball. Tatum recognizes that Devontae Graham is overplaying it, so instead he just slips to the basket, and against a smaller defender, he easily receives the pass over top of him to get the finish at the rim. All of this screening success is fully backed up by the numbers. The Celtics are the #1 scoring team off of screens in the NBA of all teams attempting at least 4 shots off of screens per game, with 1.06 points per possession. Real quick guys, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. With Underdog's NBA Pick'em, they make it super simple to win big. They've got individual player props to pick from for every single NBA game. All you have to do is pick higher or lower, and once you have your slip, make your wager and submit. You can make wagers for as low as $1 and win anywhere from 3 times your money all the way up to 20 times your money. And now with Pick'em Insurance, you can still win money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up using code AlexHoops with the link in the description today, and they'll match your first deposit up to $100. Be sure to play responsibly, and thanks again to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. With a diverse offense like they've had, there's only so much that you can do to defend it. They're one of only 3 teams in the NBA that rank in the top 10 in rim, mid-range, and 3-point efficiency alongside the Warriors and the Nets. It doesn't matter how you try to make them score the basketball because they're gonna score regardless. Having 2 fantastic scorers with Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum is great, but it's even better when you can put together a scheme like they have that puts them in even better positions to succeed rather than just relying on prolific shot making from your 2 stars in order to win you games. All of this has major implications for not only them continuing to remain the top team in the NBA, but also for what they can do in the postseason. I've already discussed how lethal their half-court offense is, which is what most teams are relegated to in the postseason when the pace of play drops. Last season, the Celtics had a pace of 97.26 possessions per game, but in the playoffs that dropped down to 95.79. What's interesting to note is that their regular season offensive rating was 113.6 last year, but it dropped down to 110.3 during the postseason. This year, their pace is up to 100.12, but their offense is obviously significantly better this season with an offensive rating of 117.5. If we look at last year's trends for reference, even if we assume that they have a 3.3 point per 100 possession drop off in offensive rating in the playoffs like they did last year, they'd still clock an offensive rating of 114.2, which would be a top 5 offense of last year's postseason. But all of this assumes that there actually is a drop off, which isn't necessarily a guarantee. It's entirely possible that they can maintain this success. Last year during the regular season, they clocked an offensive rating of 98.8 in the half court, and like I said earlier, they're clocking a much better 104.6 offensive rating in the half court. I'd say this is a much better indicator that they're well equipped to maintain success in the slower pace of postseason play this year than they were last year. With so many positive signs, there's really only one thing that I could see that might slow down the Celtics from making their way to yet another finals appearance: health. Rob Williams has missed a fair chunk of games this year, but he's looked really healthy since his return, and he's been showing why he's so impactful when he's on the court. Horford, despite being 36 years old, still remains one of the most impactful role players in the entire league. Malcolm Brogdon has been a revelation like I mentioned earlier, helping lead the second unit and providing another burst of scoring when called upon. Assuming that this team remains healthy into the postseason and they can weather the storm if they do encounter some unfortunate injury luck, it's going to be really, really hard for anybody to beat this team in a 7-game series. This video focused on their offensive production, but I could and I might do an entire video on how incredible their defense is because it's equally impressive. They're a perfectly constructed team and well-rounded enough to match the flexibility that's necessary to slow down whatever matchup they encounter. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more like this, let me know in the comments and be sure to leave a like and subscribe. That's the #1 way to support me and help me continue making content. Thanks again to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching and supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.